Welcome to Remix EQ Live, where we are amplifying equity with a remix of information, interviews, and inspiration. I'm your host, Dr. Erica Tate, and today I am broadcasting live from Savannah, Georgia, where I live. For those joining us today, please drop a greeting of choice in the comments. Let us know where you are joining from and the equity work that you do or aspire to do. And remember, Remix EQ Live is an experience that's meant to be shared. I encourage you to hit the share and invite buttons and bring along your people, your network, your family, your friends, your peeps to join our Remix EQ community today. This season, we are broadcasting live on LinkedIn and YouTube, and now we can connect more broadly, growing our reach and building our professional learning community. While those comments are flowing in and those invitations are flowing out, I want to remind you that Remix EQ Live offers the opportunity for us to connect and build community with each other around the equity driven work being performed throughout the world. And we do this by centering the work. That is, our guests and viewers share examples of what they do in their role or position as a way to illustrate the innovative and effective ways they advance equity in the spaces in which they live, work, and play. Throughout the show and in the comments, I invite you to also share what you do to make the world a more just place. Today is the season 4 finale of Remix EQ Live. Can you believe it? Yes, you can, because you can see it. Today's show, our 32nd episode, is a community reflection show. This format differs from our interview shows in that I'm not interviewing anyone. Instead, I show up without guest and with you in community to hold space for us to reflect together. As social justice warriors, we understand that reflection is necessary for us to do this work effectively, but also to sustain ourselves as we do it. With regard to format, our community reflection shows are a bit shorter than our interview shows. They include an overview of our topic, which today is inquiry, examples, and a few prompts or questions that encourage us to reflect on our approach or practices within the communities we serve. Along the way, I share or remix examples of my work or the show or what you provide if you share within the comments. You are encouraged to consider these prompts and examples more in depth during your personal journaling time or with your small circle of support, personal or professional. So let's begin our collective reflections for change. All right. Oh, good morning, Brianna Machador. Hello. Welcome. Welcome. Many of you know I love to start a session or a learning experience with a definition from Webster's Dictionary. Not as much as I love an acronym, though, but both are common introduction routines that I use. Definitions offer us the opportunity to quickly ground in shared language and meaning. So, real quick, according to Mr. M. Dubs, inquiry can be defined as a request for information, a systematic investigation, often a matter of public interest, or an examination into facts or principles. In today's show, I am focusing on inquiry into the data we review or report about our communities or to the people we serve. For many of us, our equity driven work is informed or inspired by data. This may include data about education, health, employment rates or practices, or funding for businesses or nonprofits. Some of us generate this data. Some of us interpret this data for our organization or communities. And some of us present or share or report this data with others to inform or inspire change. Today, I will share a small data set to ground us in a shared learning experience, another thing I love to do, and engage us in reflection about the questions we ask, about the data we encounter in our pursuit to make the world a more just place. For the purpose of this exercise, we will focus on common literacy data that's presented in school accountability reports, at community meetings, or in those state of education addresses we often hear. I will present this data at the national level so I can engage our Remix EQ community across the United States. But I encourage this reflective inquiry at more local levels, such as the state, district, or school level, in order to be more meaningful and impactful to the communities you live in and serve in. And for our international viewers, you are, of course, invited to contribute to today's community reflections with insights from your country experiences or your personal experiences that you have lived throughout your schooling career. And as always, in our community reflection episodes, I will share questions or prompts for us to consider in our equity driven work and practice. And as I answer these questions aloud with my experiences and examples, I invite you to do the same in the comments and share with our Remix EQ community. So, our first bit of data. What you see on your screen is a data display or graph of reading achievement scores for fourth graders in the years 2022, 2019, and 2017. For me, it's important to know your data. That is, when data is shared with you or you present or report it to others, be sure you can understand or speak to the source, setting, subject, and significance. For example, this data, the source is the United States Department of Education's National Center for Education Statistics. It is part of the National Assessment of Educational Progress dataset, which we often refer to as NAEP. So you might have heard on the news. The nation's report card is just in. NAEP scores reveal that only 33% of fourth graders have achieved proficient or above levels in reading. What's a nation to do? Turning it over to you, Remix EQ community. Love a newscaster voice. We also want to think about setting. And so setting can be place and time. So this assessment is administered to a representative sample of fourth grade students across the nation. This includes many states, the District of Columbia, DC, the Department of Defense or DOD schools. These are schools that are on our military bases, and 26 participating large urban districts. A representative sample means that the students who took or completed this assessment represent or resemble the makeup or composition of students in the US as indicated by demographics such as race, gender, or socioeconomic status. And I'll talk about this a little bit later in the episode. And setting also includes time. So the years that are displayed on this graph are 2022, 2019, and 2017. And then subject. So this is a reading assessment. It includes literary and informational text to assess students' reading comprehension skills. So NAEP achievement levels are performance standards that describe what students should know and be able to do. Results are reported as percentages of students performing at or above three achievement levels: NAEP Basic, NAEP Proficient, and NAEP Advanced. Students performing at or above the NAEP Proficient level demonstrate solid academic performance and competency over challenging subject matter, as explained on the NAEP website. And you can see here that in 2022, 33% of students achieved proficient or above. And finally, significance. Why is reading data so important to use as a measure in our nation's literacy efforts? To answer this, let's reflect on the rhetoric, the messages, the history of reading in US conversations. Reading is a right. Reading is fundamental, a gatekeeper in learning about your world and your role in it. Reading is a civil right. Reading is the most critical social justice issue today. When we reflect on US history, for example, Black people were not allowed to read. It was illegal and a crime that could be punishable by death. This delay in access, this delay in achievement for such a fundamental skill and a civil right has implications for how and why we measure students' reading ability. But more importantly, it has implications for how we measure our public schools' ability to realize its mission, which is to provide high quality, effective education for all students, no matter their circumstances, histories, or identities. This includes teaching them to read. And while we could discuss literacy for days, I do want to invite you to share in the comments your reflections about the data you review or report. How often do you ask questions about the source, subject, setting, and significance of the data that is presented to you and your community? Or when you communicate data, how do you make visible or audible the source, subject, setting, and significance of the data to others? What else should you ask? And what else should you share? For those who are just joining us, this is Remix EQ Live, and we're amplifying equity with a remix of information, interviews, and inspiration. So, thank you for sharing and inviting others to tune in. And of course, I invite you to interact with me and each other. Please post comments and ask questions as we continue our community reflections episode about inquiry into the data we review or report. You're part of this Remix EQ Live community. You are part of this experience. So far, we have reviewed NAEP reading achievement data to underscore the importance of knowing your data. That is, making sure you understand and communicate the source, setting, subject, and significance of information that you're sharing. So now let's inquire just a little bit further. When we apply a lens of equity, we must ask or share who is represented in this data. And are the different groups of people or communities represented in the data having the same experience or achieving the same outcomes? So let's tackle the first question. Who is represented in this data? For the NAEP reading assessment data we're discussing, and most educational achievement data, information about students' identities and backgrounds are also collected. This could be to document student representation in the sample to say either, yes, we have assessed students who represent our larger community, and this could be nationwide, or this could be at the school or district level. Or they might document student representation to say, yes, our students with different identities or backgrounds are achieving at similar or different levels. And we will discuss this a little bit later. But first, let's take a look at some examples of demographic data collected by NAEP. The data display here lists a few categories, such as gender and status as students with disabilities. And it features a chart that shows the percentage of students in 2022 who identify their race and ethnicity as white, Hispanic, Black, Asian Pacific Islander, Asian, and American Indian or Alaskan. Two other categories I want to discuss are related to socioeconomic status and linguistic diversity. So, NAEP, which uses the term eligibility for National School Lunch Program, for those of us who dabble in school data, we might be more familiar with the term eligible for free and reduced lunch. And this data point is often used as an indicator of socioeconomic status. NAEP also uses the term English learners. And similar terms that are used in education settings include English language learners or English as second language. Recently, bilingual or multilingual learners have emerged as a term that value multiple languages and recognize language diversity or linguistic diversity as an asset. So, as we begin our reflection on our own practices around data about people and communities' identities and backgrounds, I want to insert a few considerations. First, in order to ensure representation in your data set or speak to equity in terms of access and outcomes across groups and communities, you must collect data about people's identities, circumstances, and backgrounds. Otherwise, you don't have it, you can't speak to it, and it's very difficult to act on. With that said, we must exercise care when collecting, safeguarding, and sharing this data. And here are a few tips, which are absolutely not exhaustive, but give us something to think about. So, one, be sure to let people self identify. It is their lives, they know the most about them. And also take care in the language and terms you use and consider how people might feel when answering questions that use those terms. And think what information is absolutely necessary for you to collect. And finally, keep in mind intersectionality. We all are comprised and identify with multiple identities. So, too many points of intersections coupled with unique responses can expose a person's identity. This can be addressed by presenting data separate from the demographic information you have collected or considering the following. Is it necessary to share specific data that risks exposing members of the community? Or whether sharing the lessons learned or the data informed actions is really the most critical for making change in your community. So now I want to invite you again to represent yourself in the comments with your reflections about the data you review or report. How often do you ask questions about who is represented in the data that's being presented to you and your community? Or when you collect or communicate data, how do you take care of the people who volunteer to share their identities, circumstances, and backgrounds with you? So, now we know about our data source, setting, subject, and significance. We have inquired about who is represented in our data set. Now let's ask and answer the question. Are the different groups of people or communities represented in the data having the same experience or achieving the same outcomes? A key part of public school accountability to its stakeholders, which includes students and their families, teachers and staff, community members, local businesses, is that they must report on achievement overall and across student groups. We can't ensure equity or that all groups or communities' needs or desires are being met if data is not broken apart or disaggregated. This is how we make visible any disparities or gaps. For this data display, I focused on the average reading scores for Black and white students in grade 4 in years 2017, 2019, and 2022. I make visible the reading score gap or racial achievement gap between Black and white students over time. I want to make a final note about setting. Just like in a story, setting refers to time and place. For those of us in the Remix EQ community who engage in equity driven work, we know that place and time and history are critical to the work that we do. When inquiring and asking questions about data that makes visible differences across groups, we can ask, why do these gaps exist? And when viewing gap data across years, we can ask, why do these gaps persist? This allows us to construct a narrative or tell a story about people, students in this case, and their experiences across time and space. With disaggregated data over time, we can ask for and inquire about more descriptive or more story features. For example, characters. What do who do students interact with throughout their school career, such as teachers, interventionists, and of course, family? And how do they relate to each other? We can inquire about events. What key happenings have taken place throughout their lives, such as early education, the COVID-19 pandemic, or changes in reading curriculum and instruction? We can inquire about conflict. What barriers exist or persist for students to access schools that provide high quality reading and literacy instruction, such as high teacher turnover, limited professional development, and bias and low expectations? And of course, this is where we come in as those who perform equity driven work. We can ask and work toward the resolution. What strategic changes in representation, policy, and practices will close persistent gaps in achievement and open the door for equity in academic outcomes across student groups? For our final reflection, I invite you to author your reflections in the comments about the data you review or report. How often do you ask questions about access, achievement, and outcomes across groups and communities and over time? Or when you communicate data, what story do you tell about the communities you live, work, play, and serve? Data isn't the end of a project or some required deliverable about an organization. It is the start of a dialogue filled with question and discussions that push us to understand our community in terms of lived experiences, assets, and desires. It makes visible the people and communities in the room or in the data, and those who are missing and need to be invited. Data should make us honest and reflective about if we're achieving equitable outcomes for all communities or those who require more responsive and nuanced resources and opportunities. Data makes us come to terms about our history within our country and our community and the pervasiveness of systemic oppression that has erected barriers, that has broken relationships, and slowed progress. To counter this, we must inquire about the data we review or report in ways that signify that the information about those who have been marginalized is critical to understanding our communities, and also to set the stage for narratives of change that lead to equitable outcomes in and across the communities, and of course, make the world a more just place. For those who are new to Remix EQ Live, today's show is our community's reflection format, where I aim to hold space for us to reflect together because reflection is necessary to perform this critical work. As we come to a close, I want to remind you of our reflection prompts today. Of course, you are welcome to add your responses in the comments and continue our dialogue following this episode. These prompts can also be conversation starters with those you work with or aspire to work with. And of course, they can be used for your personal journaling practice. Our prompts. When reviewing data, how often do you ask about the source, subject, setting, and significance of the data that's presented to you? How often do you ask who is represented in the data that is presented to you in your community? And how often do you ask questions about access, achievement, or outcomes across groups or communities and over time? When you communicate data, share information with others, how often do you make visible or audible the source, subject, setting, and significance of data to others? In what ways do you consider and take care of the people who volunteer or share their identities, circumstances, and backgrounds with you? And what story do you tell about the communities you live, work, and play in? And of course, serve. As we close out today's Community Reflection Show, the fourth season of Remix and the 32nd episode, I want to say thank you. I appreciate you tuning in and showing up, adding your comments, questions, and experiences to our community. You make Remix EQ Live happen. As you know, I consider Remix EQ a professional learning community. And in almost every show, I say something like this. The Remix EQ community is always ready to add examples, strategies, and tools to our repertoire as we work to make the world a more just place. This helps us to connect and visualize the important work you do, and it also enables us to learn from and with you about the experiences of the people and places you serve. Our Remix EQ Live guests share information, experiences, and even testimony that builds our knowledge so we can ask and answer questions as we inquire and deepen our understanding so that we can inform and inspire change in the work that we do. So, of course, I encourage you to watch recordings of past episodes, a catch up, binge if you must. And you can do this on the Blue Knowledge YouTube channel and, of course, on the Remix EQ Live webpage. Today, I also want to preview with you that we plan to celebrate this growing body of work with Remix EQ Live playlist. Yes, we have so much information that we can organize by topics and categories so you can come and study and learn and be inspired in the areas that you work in or aspire to do so. We will soon feature them on our web pages and, of course, during our 12 days of a Remix EQ Live coming this holiday season. Remix EQ Live will be back in 2024 for season 5. So please watch your feed, check your inbox, and visit the Remix EQ Live webpage for episode announcements, recordings, and more information about our inspiring guests and upcoming events. In the meantime, I invite you to view my recent TEDx talk entitled Building Community to Make the World a More Just Place. My talk was inspired by the Remix EQ Live show and community. It offered me the opportunity to pause and reflect on the learning and inspiration I have been receiving over the years from interviewing guests and interacting with you, our viewers, our social justice warriors. So please watch, react, leave comments, engage in dialogue with each other, and share it with your personal and professional communities. Also, discover new ways to support the Remix EQ community via donation or purchasing merch, such as our Amplify notebook. And while you're on the show's webpage, please poke around the website and learn more about my business, Blue Knowledge, which advances equity in schools and communities through collaborative research, inclusive evaluation, and equity-driven professional learning. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and the Blue Knowledge YouTube channel. And of course, I invite you to connect with me too in these digital streets. Thank you, Remix EQ community, for your engagement, your encouragement, and your rally. I told you I like an acronym, which is how we recognize, appreciate, learn, love, and take care of you as you work to make the world a more just place. I'm your host, Dr. Erica Tate, and this is Remix EQ Live. See you next time.